Hey up and welcome to the Temple of Blair. I'm not going to apologise for the fan in the background because the planet is on fucking fire and this country is still enduring some sort of divine anger and it's still bloody boiling. And furthermore, I'm surrounded by lawyers. Shortly after speaking with Marcus Turner for the second time, I spoke with Ray Garcia. Ray was head of business affairs at Roadrunner Records on the United States side from the late 90s over to about the mid 2010s, and as such he has a wealth of experience from the other side of the pond, which has opened my eyes to a number of fresh rabbit holes to dive down. Towards the end of this conversation, Ray and I kind of cut it loose a bit and get a bit informal. Ray then starts dishing out stories left, right and centre, and it's edited as such, so it might seem like we're jumping from one bit to the other. It's because we are. It's because that's exactly what's happening. But that's what you're here for anyway. 1, 2, fuck it up.
I was a Roadrunner fan before I was there. So, my wife always tells me, you've had your dream job, and I say, yeah, but I still have a while to go before I can retire. It'd be nice to enjoy something else. But yeah, it was the perfect job. I wanted to work at a record company forever. I went to law school. I was like, okay, I'm going to work for a record company as a lawyer. I then get to work with Roadrunner. It's the right place, right time, because they just, the label just skyrocketed and with different successes. And there's a million different things that make it a special place, but there was a lot of consistency and longevity with a lot of the people there. And I think that a lot of us, whether you were in your 20s or your early 30s, you were kind of growing up in the music business in this setting with tremendous leadership, and then having the success. When you're successful, everything's a party, So it's not that it was easy all the time, but it was just a great place to be, at a perfect place and time. So yeah, it's a very special place, and I realized there will never be another place like that I will work at. But we go on to other things, and now I find myself in private practice where I represent. I still work with some of the Roadrunner folks. One of my clients is Mascot, so I deal with Ed Van Zyl and Ron Berman all the time, and we have some of the same bands. And I've done some work for Monty at different points in time. And then I have private clients as well. And I'm lucky enough now that I represent the Foo Fighters and Dave Grohl and the Nirvana estate. And, we just started representing Soundgarden a year ago, the 3 remaining members. And we have Beck and Jimmy Eat World. And, it's an exciting time for me in that respect. But I'll tell you, it was funny. One of the first things I talked about when I speak to the people who are managing Dave Grohl is Probot, because that was my connection to them. And I had to make some sort of connection. But, because he had done the different covers, and I think Max Cavalera might have been on the record. And I know he did like King Diamond covers, and it was, just a fun project. And it's been it was not the biggest connection to that world, but it was something to hang my hat on and say, hey guys, remember me?
Yeah, it's so, easier than saying I liked the color and the shape.
Yeah. And but it's funny, you've had some people who left and came back to Roadrunner. And I may be the only person who interviewed for a job and was then hired 6 years later, because I originally came out of law school. I worked at a small firm for a while, and I was there for about a year, and I was like, well, I want to do entertainment, I want to work in the music biz. So I decided I was going to leave, and I basically sent out resumes to anybody in the music business to try and get in there. And then I wound up seeing, I think there was even an ad, maybe in Billboard, but anyway, I wound up having an interview with Doug Keogh. And it went great, but I was right out of law school, and they were looking for somebody with some more experience, and they wound up hiring somebody else. And then, as life takes you through these twists and turns, I would run into Doug, or we'd speak, like every 6 months or so, that something would pop up to connect you. And then out of the blue, it was like, hey, you know what? We might want to talk again, because, it might work this time.
Right.
And then I called him up, and things went great. And he basically said, "You want to start tomorrow?" And I said, "Wow, yeah." And then I do remember he said that, you have to meet Case though. And I said, okay. So Case was going to be in town in a week or so, and I went out to coffee with Case,
Mm-hmm.
and he asked me some questions, and why did I want to work at a record company, and why didn't I just want to work at a law firm, and and I told him I wanted to be part of something that grew, and he seemed to like the answers. And I do remember though I had to pay for the coffee, and I was saying like, Jesus, man, this guy, why am I paying for the coffee at the interview? Like, this is great. But Case would travel light, and he would not, there's no reason for me carrying a ton of money around,
Mm.
and he would sometimes go to the finance department, and there was like a Case slush fund, I think, where he would be given some a stipend. But it was on me that time, and it worked out well. So that was my introduction. I was basically told that I would have I would not be full-time until 3 months later, because then a new fiscal year was starting and they could bring me onto the books. So I had a little probationary period there for about
What year are we
months.
in for this?
I think it's 99, or
Right.
is it 98? It was right after Slipknot had done Ozfest. It was that September.
Right, so that should be 99, I think. So
Yeah,
you're coming in just before it's like the Acme bomb is over here and the fuse is over there, and you're just walking in as it's making its way out. That's kind of where we are.
Yeah, all of a sudden, they were taking off, and it was the first time I had worked at a record company, so all of this was new and exciting, and but they took off. We then wound up switching offices and moving to the 902 Broadway location.
Mm-hmm.
And then within little time, Nickelback, blows up, and everything changed in all sorts of different ways.
So let's just dial back a little bit, because your two entry points are like really staggering, because you interviewed at a time prior to. Just to be clear, like the milestones I've got in my head are like my own sort of like sordid narration of how this whole story unfolds, right? So you're going in before Type O Negative's Gold, which is 95, which is the year that Roadrunner becomes a viable entity on like the industry zeitgeist. Up until that point, they're just like a metal indie label. There's plenty.
Yeah, it was probably even earlier. I think it was probably like 93 or so.
Yeah, I mean, you're coming in before that milestone year.
Right, right. Sorry.
Yeah. So we're at the point where you're interviewing at what is effectively an indie label, and then you get the job when it's a tried and tested enterprise which is expanding rapidly, or at least how do I phrase this in an appropriate way? It's attempting different things, very, very interesting things, which a metal indie has no right to do. But some things worked and some things didn't, as these things play out. So what was your perception when you went in? Because you said you were a Roadrunner fan from the get-go. Was this the case in 93?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, I was always a hard rock fan growing up in the 70s, and a metal fan, and the new wave of British heavy metal changed my life. And Kerrang became my Bible. We'd run to the import stores every Friday night when it would come out. And so Roadrunner was a part of the vocabulary, and it was really exciting to be, just being a part of it. It was all new. We were still doing different things, I guess, at that time. Derek Schulman was the president at that time. And, he was, I think, I guess his goal was to bring the label into a more commercial sphere. And there were certain artists they were trying that were less heavy. And we had, even some bands, there were some bands that were a little out there, but yeah, I remember these younger bands. I mean, we had like the Toilet Boys was a band that, we never released their record. And but they were a very New York punky, kind of band. It's perhaps they were doomed at one point when I believe they brought in the keyboard player from Bon Jovi to produce the record, which seemed to be out of left field.
A little bit.
Yeah, but yeah, like I said, there was different things being attempted, and I was just happy to be there.
Yeah.
And it was like, I didn't feel that we necessarily needed to remain a death metal label forever. So it was, it was just, that was like, well, I guess this is what they do. I guess they try different stuff here,
Yeah. In trying to set the scene on that particular movement within the label, you mentioned Derek Shulman. And Derek Shulman, to me, is a bit of an enigmatic character. So I know he was in Gentle Giant, which is like a Scottish folk band, and I don't know much more about him other than he did sort of parlay in the music industry in a very senior level for a number of years. It might have even been Mark Abramson who mentioned, yes, Derek Shulman was brought in as president to bring some sort of commercial viability. I use these phrases all the time to try and cross over into a more mainstream kind of market. What can you tell me about Derek? How was he as a person? What were his credentials? What was his management style? Because I mean, it's worth mentioning as well, like UK and US disparities in terms of corporate vocabulary. A president in this context is someone who's effectively doing the admin on behalf of the CEO, right?
Well, I think that I think the main reason he was brought in, and it might have had something to do with the musical direction as well, but Case never wanted to be in the spotlight, and that's why you never saw interviews with him. He didn't go to industry events, and I think that he wanted somebody to take on that role, and so then I'm not sure how Derek Shulman was introduced to him, but he came along, and Derek Oliver, who was an A&R guy who worked with him, also came along. It was, the two Dereks had come into Roadrunner at the same time. And Derek Oliver was more of a melodic, metal fan. And I think that was also part of perhaps trying to branch off into something more commercial. But I think it was really to have a spokesperson for the company that wouldn't have to be Case,
Right.
But I didn't overlap with Derek for long. Because again, when I was first brought in, those first 3 months at the old office, it was a very odd setup. It was like a bit of a maze. So there was a front room where Case and Derek were at. There was like a radio publicity room where there were 6 or 5 people, on the phones all the time. And then there was a hallway. And then you wound up in this bigger room with these little alcoves, and there was finance, graphic design. Doug Keogh was in one area. BA kind of took over a little backspace. Stefan Koster was further back doing international. IT people were there as well. So I didn't see Derek much, and at that point in time, I was not in a real position of, any kind of responsibility. I mean, I was more of, okay, you're the BA guy, you're going to do the legal work, and a lot of it was really taking care of business that hadn't been done for a while. And then I think, when we made the move, I don't remember when Derek exited, but at some point soon after, he left the company. So there's not much that I have to really tell about him, because I wasn't involved the same way. Later on in my career, I was in the management meetings with different department heads and Case, and then I would also have my own meeting. I had like the BA meeting, which I would run, and that had Case, at the time Jonas, who was the president. Doug was there as well. I'm not sure if the head of A&R, Dave Rath, might have been in the meeting at that time. Monty was in there for a while as well. But that's when I had more responsibility, and I was helping kind of, in some ways, write the narrative of what we were doing. So I have much better, I have much more to say about the people at that time frame than prior to that. No,
that's fine. I'll just sort of like elaborate. I mean, when you walk into someone's house, right, and you see a book on the shelf and it's like a biography of Winston Churchill, the impression you get as a visitor to that house is like, this guy had the idea that he was going to read a book on Churchill. Whether he read the book or not is beside the point. So this is why I stress the importance of like these individuals that try and form this time that the label is expanding in this crazy way, because somewhere down the line, someone thought Derek Shulman was the man for the job, or at least to be the face of the operations. And I think while we're in that kind of weird Wild West zone in the late 90s, it would really help me to understand the reasoning behind those people. That's why I kind of stress certain individuals over like long period of time until I really crack those nuts. Um,
Yeah, I mean, when he came again, when he was there, I was under the impression that Derek Oliver came along with him. I don't know that they were joined at the hip per se, but they seemed to come in at the same time. And I know that there were certain, there were bands that, that didn't make it out of that run. But there was a band called Tam that was signed at the time.
yeah.
Derek Oliver also signed, oh God, what was the name of the band? I can't remember now. But, we had the Step Kings, was actually Ron Berman signing.
Yeah.
And then one of the band members went on to be part of Crush Management, which is one of the biggest management companies, around. But yeah, it seemed that they were they were bringing in more, rock music, more radio friendly stuff. And, Derek had the rep for, having been part of bringing Bon Jovi to the masses.
Mm-hmm.
So I can only imagine that was part of the,
Yeah, it must have been. I need to look at the Derek's CVs of it a bit closer to sort of maybe that's where the answer lies. But there's other people in there as well, like Dave Lonco.
Oh yeah.
And people
but
like
Dave
that
was around for a while. I mean, obviously, and helped change the label in such a tremendous way.
Exactly. When you think of like that, I mean, let's talk 97. We've got, I think Dave Lonco was in that sort of period. Yeah, we have Mike Gitter and Ron Berman, and their impact is just, I mean, from an A&R perspective, it's really easy to sort of like, it's really easy to compare. It's really easy because you can just go Nickelback, Killswitch Engage. Those are two musical arcs and legacies which really define what the label's about. And then I try and take a step back, a step beyond the A&R on the front end and start thinking about the back office stuff. But yeah, no, it's cool. I'll look into that a little bit closer. So 99, the arcade acquisition's going on. In fact, let's actually make this a little even less formal. Let's make it less histogrammical, I guess. What is your day to day then? Are you straight in with the deals? You said you were doing some work that hadn't been done in a while. Was there some sort of like a catalog that needed acquiring or something?
Well, there seemed to be a backlog of work. A lot of it was licenses. I mean, I distinctly remember that a typo negative song was used in the Howard Stern movie, Private Parts. And it had never been, the license was never done. And I think that probably Pete, I don't think it was Josh, but it was Pete Steele would always say, what's going on? Where's our statements? Why are we hearing anything about this? And it's just because the deal was never papered. So they weren't going to pay any royalties until that happened. And I remember, finally, this is really getting into the weeds, but I remember I'm looking into this file. And,
I love getting into the weeds. You'll learn this. I fucking love it.
Well, at the major labels, it's a revolving door, right? So I'm dealing with, Mr. X is the BA person handling this deal. Okay, I call up. He's not there anymore. Nobody remembers what went on. And I think that at the end, there was a dispute over who was going to pay Rick Rubin royalties, if I'm not mistaken, because he produced the track. It was something crazy like that. So then I wind up I'm working on some other project, and I call a different major label, and Mr. X is at the label.
Oh,
So I said, hey, I was just looking at the Private Parts deal, and you wouldn't happen to remember what happened here, would you? And then he told me what his recollection of it was, and it had to do with these, producer payments that weren't made, and nobody knew who was going to be responsible. So we finally got the deal done. So I did get that one done, one done. And as Doug would say, okay, you've earned your pay this week, like you've earned your pay today, you've done, you've accomplished something. But I was taking care of things like that. I think when we moved to 902 Broadway, I was more involved in the deals. I think it was more a case of, here's a deal memo, do a contract,
Right, okay.
I don't think I was that involved necessarily before the deals got to that point. But of course, that was going to come with time. And part of it, learning how Roadrunner did business. And, at some point then, Doug would always do these P&L reports for the deals. And then he just said, well, you can do them. And he gave me the form. And it was, a lot of plug and play with the numbers. But it got to the point where basically there'd be, the A&R meetings would take almost all day sometimes. Case would be in there with the A&R guys for 4 hours at least, it seemed, if not longer. And once that meeting was over, there was a mad dash to my desk, or I'd get emails because we got to get this offer out now, and I would get a rundown. And at that point, there were times where some of the terms were, more defined, especially the money. but then it got to the point where it's like, okay, Ray, here's like the range that we're looking at. And they would give me the information as to what projected sales might be, how much
Okay.
is the marketing going to be, 2 videos, no video, what are we doing here? What's tour support? And then, we punch it into this report, and then it had to be within an acceptable range. And then we would be like, okay, at this money, the deal makes sense. At this level, we're going to break even.
Mm-hmm.
At this level, we're going to lose money. So then, we would go out with an offer somewhere in the middle there that would give us room to maneuver. But that's one thing that process showed me was that Case was very serious about the business, and this is something that I didn't necessarily realize at the time, but I picked up from your other interviews or discussions, was that he was this experienced record label guy. So Roadrunner was so much more professional than any indie I'd ever been with, but the ones I was with before then were typically a lot smaller.
Mm-hmm.
But he wanted things to be done in a proper way. So I had to have a deal memo that had to be signed off by him and by the A&R guy, and I couldn't do a deal without that. And I think that those were the types of things that I later saw. When we sold the company, the purchaser would be saying, "I can't believe how organized you guys are. Like, this is like no other indie we've ever seen before." And that was important to Case. And I remember when we would try something new. Like, he wanted to do movie soundtracks. So he's like, "Okay, Ray, have you ever done movie soundtrack?" No. He's like, "Okay, well, we're going to hire somebody. So go find a lawyer and then, ride shotgun, learn everything you can, and then you'll do the next one." So that's what we did. But he was all about that. And then I remember another point in time, after a few years, he wanted me to find an attorney to look over our contracts and make sure they were state of the art.
State of the art.
Yeah, like he always, he did not want us to have a disadvantage on that front. Like, we were going to be run like, a professional company.
Okay. I guess we're also like we're in a pre-360 deal world, although Case is orchestrating 360 deals.
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, he did always want to find a way to get a piece of the touring, right? And that's something that we never had beforehand because nobody did that, But yeah, it's funny because I've been watching some of the other episodes.
Mm-hmm.
The discussions with the bands and how harsh the deals were.
Mm-hmm.
These were indie deals, Like, at this point in time, I have clients who entered into deals with other labels at that time,
mm-hmm.
and those deals were 100 times worse than anything I ever saw a Roadrunner put out. It was an indie deal. You were a band that was not attracting a major label, and it was going to be low money. It was going to be low royalties, and if they could get your publishing, they'd try and get your publishing. And Roadrunner was just playing ball the way everybody else was, to be honest with you.
The reason I focus on the deals is because I know it's not as simple as it looks. I know it's not fat bloke behind a desk with a cigar. It can't be as simple as that, because that's not how an incentive structure on planet Earth works.
Right.
And slowly developing like the vision, if you will, of like how this is going to be explained. And it's one of the great things that was explained to me recently was. And this is the problem with this podcast. I can't remember who tells me these things, so I can't credit the right people with it.
Well, I might remember. Go ahead.
Go, right. So, $5,000 deal. Doesn't sound great. But then you think there's a $5,000 investment in the band for the advance, but there's also about $500,000 investment across the planet for an infrastructure, which is something that no other indie label can offer. Worldwide coverage, at least to some extent, because I know there's a threshold a band would pass before, that could be taken advantage of. But there's what you say about these are bands that aren't attracting any major interest. There's a whole dynamic at play as to why these deals were more advantageous than disadvantageous. And I think it's easy to punch up at Roadrunner because it's punching up because Roadrunner was successful. You don't hear anyone complaining about any other major deals or other indie deals because the context is completely different. It's easy to shit on Roadrunner for that deal because they were so successful. And I think it's the social dynamic there, which makes it easy to punch it up to. But
you would also have situations where, because it was Roadrunner, like you said, they knew that they would want to get more money.
Yeah.
They would want to get a bigger advance or a higher royalty. And at times, they would wind up look, there were times where we'd sign a band, and then we'd wind up having to part ways with them, right? It just wasn't working out. And it was like, okay, we're not going to pick up the option.
Yeah.
Or we'd go to the band and say, do you want to renegotiate your deal down? Nobody wants to renegotiate their deal down, and not only do they not want to take a lesser deal, but, it's like you often hear with professional athletes, they want the respect, and respect comes with money. And if you tell somebody you're worth less, they're not going to take kindly to that.
Yeah.
But these bands would invariably take lesser deals somewhere else. But that's just the way it worked. It's like they wouldn't stay with us, whether it was to save face or they thought they could do better, they'd go elsewhere, and then they'd wind up getting a lesser deal,
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of labels that were not as successful as Roadrunner, would obviously would do lesser deals and, more grabby deals even than Roadrunner was doing at certain times.
You can even say, all right, if that band's been turned away if Roadrunner can't work that band, then they can't be worth as much as what they think they're worth. Therefore, the lesser deal is the better option. I'm speaking from rival labels' perspective, from an outgoing artist. But yeah, I think the economics of it are worth completely hashing out and sort of trying to understand clearer, because the objective in that building was to propagate more metal. That was what was the objective. There was a business dynamic to it, and there was a business infrastructure to it, but that's just the way. That's the way we've developed it for the last 1,000 years. So
I think that it would be too short-sighted of me to just say that things weren't planned out as much as they were. But I think that there's, one thing I've noticed, like there's a lot of things that there's a process, and it's like this trust the process is something you hear in a lot of professional sports teams in the US now, right? About how they improve. And it's like, okay, if you sign the right bands, if you don't overspend, if you cross your T's and dot your I's, you process, there will be successes that come of that. And your business will continue to flow, right? And I think that that's part of it too. Like, I don't know, like I'm sure there were times where people came into the company, whether it be a new A&R person with a new strategy or a new set of artists that they were eyeing. I don't know that the plan was necessarily ever to do that, but at that point in time, this person showed up and had a compelling story. And I was like, this is going to fit into our plan. Yeah, let's do this. And that's how some things happen. Like, I don't know that Case ever wanted to have a hardcore part of the label when he brought Howie Abrams in. But Howie Abrams came into his life with something that seemed to make sense at that point in time. Yeah. And so he came on board, and then we signed those bands that he brought to the table. But it could have been somebody else, and it could have been a different type of music, So I don't know that I don't know if it's a master plan, I think there's a framework for a business, and there's certainly goals that are set along the way. But then it's like, the wheels are in motion, and things come about when you least expect them. I'm sure nobody thought Slipknot was going to do what it did, 3 months out, or any number of other bands. And I'm sure there's bands that we thought were going to blow up a lot quicker that either didn't or never happened.
Yeah. I think there's also there's an economic dynamic I've been resting on, and maybe I could pry for some thoughts on this. But there is a cash flow consideration to be made when we think about these deals, and like the typical deal that happened at that time. And that's simply, my example is typically about 1985, when Case has about between 15 and 20 acts, direct signings. The staple deal being the $5,000. The office is in the middle of Amsterdam. We've just invested $75,000 or European equivalent or whatever it is on effectively gambles, because we don't know if we're going to make a return. We have an educated guess based on the last 5 years of heavy metal, and a now emerging indie scene, but there's really a gamble. So that's 75,000 that could be down the drain. That's a lot of money, especially in 1985. And I imagine that position is still, I mean, we know Roadrunner is a profitable company, especially, as we enter into the 2000s and the Slipknot era. There's still a big chunk. If we take the pie chart of like the Roadrunner treasury, whatever the vault which Doug Keogh sits in front of, and there must be like a big chunk of that, maybe even like 25. I'm not going to throw a number out. I don't fucking know. There must be a large and non-negligible number that's a portion of that treasury, which is just could be piss in the wind. It could be a complete gamble. And I think is that am I close to something here? Is that a consideration? The fact that there is a cash flow concern.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that you've got, again, an experienced businessman in Case who was well schooled in the record business, and I think he understood what was going to be involved in taking on this task of starting a record company and growing it. So I think that if anything, I think they might be more. They were investments. In each band. And I don't think anything ever rises to the level of a gamble, because I think there was more thought put into it than that. And I know you're not saying it to be dismissive.
I'm not.
I get it. But I think that they thought that if they did things a certain way, there would be a result, and at least they wouldn't lose their shirts.
Sure.
I'll tell you, it was funny one time, and I may segue, and you can reel me back in if you want.
I'm about to go on another different tangent after this bit. Okay. That's not been on the question, so yeah.
So here's the thing. So, again, I think that there's different people had different relationships with Case, right? But he was a super interesting guy, and one of the things that I loved about working there was that, I mean, again, brilliant businessman, and then I was lucky that at one point, a few years in, I remember we were doing a deal, and I went back out with a counter proposal, and I don't know what I wound up including. It was either more money than he wanted to spend somewhere, or he was okay to spend more, and somebody else had said, nah, don't do that. And at that point he said, Ray, from now on, you only deal with me. And I was like, I was happy as, It's like, great, I get to deal with Case, is awesome. So, then it was direct phone calls, direct conversations, like every deal went through him. And that's where I got like my master's degree and, how to do business, It was a funny story. One time I called him up, and I thought I was going to get him in Holland and ask him about a deal. And instead he tells me that he's in Japan. And I realized that it's probably 4:00 in the morning there, and I've just woken him up. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, Case. And he's like, no, I was going to wake up soon anyway to go run. He's like, well, what do you have? And like, he was on all the time, like he was there. If you had a question and it was a real business question and you weren't wasting his time, he was more than happy to answer it at any point in time. And, I think that, and let me know if you want me to, I'd like to tell you a little more about him from what I know.
By all means.
I don't know where else this will come from. I mean, obviously Monty would tell the full story. Doug Keogh was there for almost 25 years. Jonas Naxon was there for a long time dealing with Case directly. But, Case was very competitive. And we used to have these Roadrunner conventions where we would have people come in from the other offices, right? Typically marketing people, A&R people, the head of the office. And we'd introduce like that year's, offerings. The A&R guys would go up there. And, we would discuss different types of marketing ideas. All these things would be going on. But there was always some, a company bonding type experience. And so at one point we were somewhere in Pennsylvania, at some forest resort, and paintball was going to be the event, right? And it's raining and it's miserable, and we're all in these fatigues and sloshing through the mud with these paintball guns. And Case is on his belly, like a soldier, because he's going to win. And he was going there and he was going to like sneak attack somebody or something, And another time, there was some kind of scavenger hunt that I remember. And something had to do with like women's clothing. And I wasn't there to see it, but people like, oh yeah, Case was walking through the lobby in a woman's dress and a big floppy hat. And it was part of the scavenger hunt. And it was, so,
wow.
And then I'll give you one more. We, at one point we had a bowling tournament in New York, right? And the teams were picked, and I'm sure there might have been some skewing of the talent, so Case's team had some talent, and Jonas Naxon, the president, had some talent. I can't say for sure. I mean, I only bowled probably like once a year or every 2 years, right? But I knew how to throw a ball, but I wouldn't consider myself any good. So I don't know if it was just because I was on Case's team, but I was like the best bowler in the world that day. And like we crushed it. We won, and before that, we had gotten Chris Masutka. We bought these white T-shirts. Him and Michelle Van Arendonk were on the team, and Aaliyah Hios was also on the team. I don't want to leave him out. And they got black magic markers, and they wrote Case's Weasels, and that was the name of our team. And so we win this tournament, and next time I go to Case's office, he never had a gold record on his wall. No artwork, no glory, no trophies. But there's this framed Case's Weasels T-shirt with a picture of us. And I was like, you know what? I think from now on, I'm going to be golden for a while here, because I'm on that little picture on his wall. And that, that showed his competitive spirit. And every time, Jonas would come into his office, I'm sure he'd remind him that he lost. But to be fair, Jonas's team won the next year, and it was very disappointing. But that gives you some insight into Case. He was driven. He enjoyed having fun with with his coworkers too, and the people who worked for him, I should say. Yeah. Even a lot of other people who didn't deal with him as much would be very guarded and nervous even. I remember we went out to sushi before the bowling tournament, and myself and I think Dave Rath were the only people who were speaking. And then somebody told me, well, yeah, nobody else has. Nobody speaks. They don't have a direct line to him.
Yeah.
So you can't expect them to just, be all shits and giggles during dinner. It's a different thing for them. But yeah, I wanted to mention that kind of stuff because I thought it would be.
It helps illustrate an angle, which is, it speaks to Case, it speaks to management in general, it speaks to anyone in the working world can relate to this, which is Case gives a massive fuck about his employees or his colleagues, or however you want to structure the hierarchy. He's big on development. A lot of people all of the hires, you said earlier in this conversation, these are all like 20-somethings, 30-somethings. This is a rabble of fucking kids in the middle of the music industry, in a burgeoning kind of blossoming scene. So, and he's there basically guiding everyone, not necessarily guiding them by the hand, but he's dropping people in situations where they're going to learn a lot. And the trajectory and the outcome of that attitude and those stories like yours are things like you're now working with Foo Fighters. Monty's now heading up Nuclear Blast in the USA. Michelle Kerr is heading up her own company, which represents like the vast majority of the metal industry. The cross-pollination of Roadrunner after its, I'll call it perceived demise, but after the Red Wedding in 2012, it speaks volumes as to how Case incubated that talent. And we're all reaping the rewards of it these days.
Yeah, there's even more than, I don't know, do you know who Rose Slanik is? So Rose, she ran our Canadian office. And now she's a GM at 11/7 Music. So, I always feel like if I ever get in trouble, I have a lot of contacts in high places now because of Roadrunner. She used to work for, I think it was Attic, was our distributor or licensee in Canada for years. And then at one point, Case realized that it would be a good idea to start a Canadian company. And in part, the Canadian acts would get different grants and trust fund monies to do videos, to record albums. Some of those are loans. Some of them were just grant monies given to them. And to take advantage of them, you had to be either a Canadian band or I believe have a Canadian producer or Canadian ownership. So that was at one point, it was, okay, we're going to start Roadrunner Canada. And then we tabbed Rose as the person we wanted to head up that office. And, she accepted and was with us for a long time there,
Yeah. I'm good. I didn't have a name of the Canada from the Canadian office, so I'm definitely going to pursue that, which usually involves me just finding out where they work now and then knocking on the front door and asking questions. But it not only are those stories about those leadership, not only are they fun, but they're actually critically important to this whole narrative. Critically important. But let's take a massive step back, because you mentioned something earlier which really intrigued me, which was we want to do soundtracks. We want to do OST for films.
Right.
So there's different products. There's metal as a product cycle. There's albums and there's live albums. There's things like that. But sometimes there's original soundtracks and sometimes there's compilation CDs. And there's two particular ones which, if I let's call it three, there's three ones which are typically regarded in conversation, say in Monty's Facebook posts, in correspondence with other people, where there's these certain things that people give a massive shit about. One of them is the MTV Headbangers Ball compilation. That is regarded as like a big achievement for Roadrunner. The Freddy vs. Jason soundtrack.
Right. Okay.
And last but not least, Spider-Man.
Yes.
So my question is, how do these deals and how do these arrangements differ from the normal day-to-day product cycle of a record label?
Well, look, on the MTV records, we're going to be compilations capturing a moment in time, you know, the most popular music available at the time, right, in our world, right, in the heavy metal or hard rock world. And, you know, because we didn't want to just do the same old thing, you know, typically our records had to be 2 CDs, and we'd have a second CD with a lot of baby bands or developing bands, right?
Is this standard practice? Is this Roadrunner standard practice? And is to be picked for MTV's Headbangers Ball as a label? Is that like a point of prestige?
Well, I think that what happened was there's, you know, I'm not sure where the idea came from, right? But obviously at that time, you know, we're in with MTV. We're trying to get our videos on MTV, you know, and there's relationships that are built up. And then, you know, I'm not sure who had the idea, but there was the idea to do this MTV Headbangers Ball compilation, you know, and I think that, you know, I mean, metal was exploding, you know, which was good and bad. You know, I think as far as, you know, once the majors got involved, you know, then it became a much more high stakes game. You know, the idea of getting a band's publishing was going out the door unless, you know, it was, unless the deal was made relevant, you know, because you'd have a major publisher paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for the publishing. So no band would give it up if they didn't have to, right? So we MTV believes that we're the right partner for this, right? Nobody thinks that, you know, somebody can do a job with MTV style metal and reach that audience better than Roadrunner, you know? And we're like, okay, great, let's, you know, we're going to do this. So then, you know, I basically am told in some meeting that we're going to do this record, and it's not going to be stacked with Roadrunner artists. There will be Roadrunner artists, of course. I mean, that's partly why they came to us, was because Slipknot would be on it, you know, or another popular band. But, you know, we then had to go. And I remember calling up, you know, we were having a hard time getting a major act from one of the major labels. And I call up the head of the label basically, and he's like, why am I going to give you my single? And I said, well, you know, listen, it's an MTV production. I'm throwing out anything I can to try and say that we should help MTV out here. But, you know, we think it's just going to, you know, gain more exposure for the artist. You know, we're going to do a job that they're not doing. You know, people are still, nobody's going to not buy a System of a Down record because, you know, a System of a Down song's on one of these compilations. And I don't think that was the band, but that we were talking about. But, you know, so ultimately it was like, well, yeah, hold on. I think we can work this out, you know? So anyway, so we wind up doing these deals, and it was just a licensing nightmare because, you know, it's the same work to license one song as it is to license an album. And all of a sudden we've got to license about 40 songs and then see if we can get breaks from any of the publishers. And, you know, for the second disc, you know, maybe we can do some buyouts, you know, where then we don't have to have an ongoing, you know, royalty, you know, flow that then takes up part of your manpower. So, you know, but I do fondly recall those records because I think that's where Monty, you know, appreciated the work I did. And I don't know if it was he who dubbed me the closer, but that's how I was thanked on the record. And that meant, at the time, that meant a lot. But yeah, then we did a second Headbangers Ball. We did another Return of the Rock. I don't know if we did 2 of those. But yeah, we had a good run with MTV, and I think it was, you know, worked for both parties. Obviously, MTV was going to, you know, take a share of the earnings that came in, so it was different from, you know, a record where we were capturing everything. But it, you know, it helped. Look, it also helps solidify us as, you know, the metal label.
This is the thing, isn't it? This is the thing. It's all about viability in mainstream markets and making sure that more people were seeing that little red candy bar logo. People that wouldn't normally be seeing it.
You know, I'd say yes. There's a little bit of no in that too, though, because Case was never, as much as he wanted Roadrunner to grow, he never really cared about Roadrunner getting mentioned in a lot of places, to be honest with you.
Okay.
And you'll see when we'd have an artist perform on another band's album, a singer or a guitar player would do participate on a song, there's always a courtesy line, right? That says courtesy of, it would be like Roadrunner Records.
Okay.
You'll see that a lot of ours say, Dino Cazares appears courtesy of Fear Factory and Roadrunner Records. Or it might just be the band. Like we cared more that the band got promoted than the label.
Okay.
And I know that may seem opposite to some things you've heard, but I mean, Case always said bands sell records. And yes, Roadrunner became a brand for sure. Yeah. And you'd buy it because you knew it was on Roadrunner. Mm-hmm. But that was only a product of the bands being built up.
Yeah.
If the bands weren't as big and popular as they were, then nobody would give a shit about the red label.
Yeah,
so
that's interesting.
I don't think we can, we should delude ourselves into thinking that we were more than we were either. I mean, it was always about the talent, the records, the songs, ultimately.
Can I throw a curveball question that might get edited out?
Sure.
Did you have any hand or any visibility in what is it? Is it Corey Taylor joining Velvet Revolver or joining Anthrax after Dan Nelson left? So one of those things was blocked.
I believe he sang with Anthrax. I don't think it was Velvet Revolver. I could be wrong, but I don't remember that happening. And with Anthrax, I remember that happening, but I mean, as far as he didn't wind up doing an entire record, right? I think he just did perhaps a song or two or three. I don't remember.
I think somewhere between those two bands, when there was a singer vacancy, I think it might have been Anthrax. I think he was slated to either join or do an album or something. And I think somewhere in ink on the internet, it says that Roadrunner blocked him from doing that.
That might have been the case, but if it was, I would think that Slipknot and their management were also on board. Yeah. I mean, I think that we're ultimately looking at the prize here. And I mean, I remember thinking that, you have to be reminded, like, Slipknot is the important band here. Yeah. And if somebody wants to do something else, that's great, and we're down for that, and we can explore different projects. Mm-hmm. But it should be coming back to that, shouldn't it? And I don't think the people involved disagreed. So I don't know that it would have been, just a block from Roadrunner.
Yeah. I think it's probably a classic internet thing of people. It's probably not as simple as it seems.
Yeah, and I don't think it's, and I think that even just once that idea gets fleshed out, I think everybody realizes, like, what are you doing? Like, what? I mean, you're definitely sending mixed messages to your fans, and what's your goal here? I mean, if the goal is to you want to continue with Slipknot being, the monster that it was, then maybe that's not the best thing to do. But again, I don't remember those conversations. I do remember something about it happening, but perhaps that all happened behind closed doors, and it was just, at the end of the day, it was something else. So
if this stays in, it's because I've read up after the fact and I've got my facts roughly straight. And what we've done here is we've expanded on that point and sort of like come to a very reasonable conclusion. If I cut this, it's because I've got it wrong. And it makes no sense to actually explain.
No worries.
Cool. So,
no, but look, the same thing happened when Corey wanted to do Stone Sour, or somebody wanted to do another project. Yeah. And, it just wound up that those bands were going to be off the road for a while, and they wanted to keep busy and do something, and Corey's obviously carved out an amazing career with Stone Sour too. I mean, you can't see it, but I have a gold record over there with his name on it. So I think that, and obviously that was something that, helped the label too. They were very successful records,
Was the idea behind Murder's Stone Sour? There was Clowns Project, there was a few other projects. Was this just, because a few of these guys get imprints as well, don't they? Is this, I'm taking a fucking break, we're going to do these things to keep the P&L sheets looking nice and healthy?
That's obviously going to be part of it, but I think it was more, okay, if you're going to have a band off the road for 2 years, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
And do you want to, set the stage to do things that will cause them to veer away from that? I mean, if you're not going to put out something by one of the band members, they're going to want to get it out somehow, right? And ultimately, you're probably going to have to say yes.
Yeah.
And the last thing you would want would be for a band member to have a success on another record label, and then that record label really doesn't want Slipknot to come back. They'd want that band member's new band to continue. So I think that there was a lot of, okay, it makes sense to try and keep things in-house.
Yeah.
And be able to, have the proper conversations throughout to make sure that everybody's still on the same page, and, and then you gave these artists their outlets, to my surprise was Clown's Project. He had got an imprint. I don't think the other guys had imprints. They released their projects. But yeah, it was a way for them to, to keep busy, and express themselves as they might not be able to, I mean, Murder Dolls was not going to, the Murder Dolls song was not going to be on a Slipknot album,
Yeah.
and neither was To My Surprise, which was a lot more alternative leaning, so it gave them that outlet, and I think it's important, I mean, look, all those guys that we just, the players we mentioned were important members, super important members of that band, truly gifted, I mean, in different ways. And I think it was important to allow them to express themselves, in other ways too, just for them to feel their fulfillment, not to sound corny, but that's part of this. This is, where, it's, I mean, it is art, it's not just a commodity. We're not selling shoes, and I think people need to be allowed to stretch out, in order to then, come back and do things, even better, so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think those, Slipknot always came back and killed it, so those projects had no ill effects, on the music at all, so.
Yeah, I guess it kind of I guess I like to compound on those, what I perceive as like breaks in the metabolism. Something new is happening, and what's the label's perspective. So that's why I kind of like to stress on that stuff. Just going back onto like the slightly. Oh, how are you doing for time, by the way? I've nicked you for an hour.
Oh, I'm good.
Sweet.
I'm good. I told everybody not to bother me for a while, so.
Cool. So we talked about MTV. Have you got any memories of Spider-Man? Have you got any memories of Hero? Have you got any memories of the soundtrack? Because that was like a 3-way joint venture, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'll tell you, that
the
was
whole OST.
That was another a great learning moment for me from Case. So Spider-Man comes about, and Hero gets done with Chad and Joey from Saliva, both singing on the track. Some 41 had a song on it too. Those are going to be the video tracks. And then at one point, I just remember Case coming to me and he says, "Ray, make sure we get singles rights." And I'm like, well, we're technically not the ones putting out the record. It's not even IDJ. I think it was Sony was the label releasing the record. He's like, no, we must have singles rights. And I'm like, okay. So I then get on the conference call and I'm like, okay, so one last thing. We need to have the singles rights.
Columbo.
Like, what are you talking about? Yeah, exactly. What are you talking about? And I'm like, well, and I'm like, okay, what can I make up here that's going to sound good? And I'm like, well, look, we're Roadrunner. We don't have 10 Nickelbacks. Nickelback is our biggest selling band. We have to take care of this, with in any way we can. We can't allow a single to be handled by a third-party record company. It's just not going to fly, Well, and ultimately they relented. I remember we had another conference call, and I started going into my shtick again, and the person at IDJ said, "Ray, they've agreed. You've got this." And yeah, we got them, and it was great. I mean, Hero was a big song. I'm sure we sold a ton of CD singles to somebody. I just don't know who bought those, but it was super popular. And it was just another, I don't know if anybody else would have said we need to get singles rights, Ray. You make sure we do that, but Case knew the value of getting that, at that time. And I think we might have been veering towards a digital age. And perhaps he even then knew that, the power of one song that would get played a lot could mean something. I'm not sure how much Hero gets played today, but
well, it's definitely still revered, especially in like this new age of like the whole Marvel experiment and things like that. I heard for the first time in a few years, Christ, what's it called? The one that was on the Avengers soundtrack, the Soundgarden song.
Oh yeah.
I think it was something like the sun we will live to rise. That's it. Live to rise.
Yeah.
I had to sing it. Sorry, everyone.
And just to let you know, unfinished business happens everywhere. We just finished a producer deal for that song. A producer popped up and said, we never did the paper on this. And so there I am, back to my beginnings at Roadrunner, cleaning up years old messes. But
wow,
there you go.
That's awesome. Okay, I'm gonna actually go back to the question which I prepped after we've just gone off for like 30 minutes. Thinking about the macro of Roadrunner when you joined, so when you're joining in '99, the arcade takeover is going on. This is kind of looked back on now as like, this was a funny move. This was a strange thing to do. Obviously, there's another side to that, which is like, it kind of makes sense at the time because there's a lot of real estate in arcade and there's a lot of viability in that model. So why not? Especially if we're already acquiring fucking gangster rap labels, let's go into pop compilations as well. Why the fuck not? What's the perception on the New York side? Because I've heard Marcus talk about this at length and Paolo D'Alessandro. Obviously, this is all in hindsight. But what's the US experience of this particular saga?
I don't think it registered much here.
Really?
It really wasn't going to impact our lives. We were doing what we were doing. I think that we felt that we were the main A&R source for the label, and this was something Case was doing. And, I don't know how much it filtered down to a lot of other people either. I think that, some of the top level execs knew, I knew that this was happening, and I was probably helping put together some of the, paperwork to get the thing done. But, I don't think the head of radio promo cared, or the head of marketing or the product manager for Slipknot, it's not going to care what's going on. It's just like, okay, Case is doing Case things somewhere. And, there you go. We're going to own something, and I do remember there was actually a store about 3 blocks away from our office called Arcade America in large, and every time I pass by, people are like, is that could be the new office, but I had forgotten about that. And I remember Satterley mentioned it in his discussion, the RAC, RAC. And I remember that coming down the pike, but I have a very short memory of that. So it came and it didn't really affect our lives in the US.
So as we go down the chain of causation that the EDEL stuff and things like that, one thing Marcus mentioned, I'm going to use this soundbite to present this question, which is if you ask people today, were you aware just how close Roadrunner was to becoming just completely falling over completely? Were you aware of how close that came?
I was, and I think there was probably only 4 or 5 people in the US office who knew. Well, I should say, I can't say that the people in charge of departments didn't know. They probably did. But it did not filter down. It was not something you wanted to get around, obviously.
Sure.
And I'll tell you though, when that happened, I remember Doug calling, some of us, I think we were called into the conference room and told what was going on. And Dave Rath, who, was heading up the A&R department at that time and was really in charge of, getting all the payments done, the admin. And it was like, okay, we are going to pay every artist every dime they're owed. Like, we're not going to skimp on that. We're not going to cut anybody out, and we're going to pay every employee. We didn't let anybody go, and we were not going to. There's other companies where even I know somebody who was at a major label recently, and they were a year later arguing about their bonus. And it was, but it was like, no, we're going to pay the bands, we're going to pay the employees, and then I was told, don't pay anybody else. And basically, we had to find ways to put people off. I think it was 3 months. And first it was, okay, ignore the phone calls. And then it was like, okay, we'll get back to you. And there was something else. And, we'd push things off. But yeah, I mean, it was, I mean, I remember Dave Rath definitely having, a harder time of it because people were breathing down his neck to get paid.
Yeah.
And, it's funny, there was actually the idea of having a Roadrunner book written while this was going on. And I think Case okayed exploring this, and we actually hired somebody who used to write, I think for something to do with MTV, but we hired someone and they put together like a chapter or 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
And part of this was in the chapter. And I think Case was presented with it. He said, "Are you fucking crazy?" All of our bands will leave. What are you talking about? And it was like, so that was not to be discussed. And I think at this point in time, enough people have said something that this can be known. But yeah, it was just, I don't know what happened with Adele. But I do remember like earlier in my career, I worked with this little punk label, and we were affiliated. We did some business with Epitaph. Mm-hmm. And the Offspring had their massive record.
Yeah.
And every one of their partners around the world decided that they were geniuses, and they were the reason why the Offspring was successful in Brazil or wherever it might be. And all these companies were buying buildings because they were going to grow their massive operations. And then a year later, there was no other Offspring record, and it all went downhill. And I don't know if there was something to that with Adele. I don't know what the reason, I don't know what the cause was of their issues. But
I think from what I can gather, I need to do some proper research on this, but it's I think it was an IPO, and I think they're just devalued. Okay. Were you part of the enclave then of people where the call came in saying we owe 10 million and we have 30 days?
No.
That was you just knew something was going on.
No, I was just told that we're going to have some issues soon, and we're going to be we're going to be tight with the money for a while, so I think I don't think I wanted to know more at that time,
No, fair enough.
But yeah, and that was soon. I think that was early on in my career there, and I think Dave Rath had only been on the job for like a week or so when this whole thing came down. So it was like, oh, by the way, now that you're here, enjoy your first task.
So let's talk about the Universal deal then. Because that ends up being the saving grace.
I'll tell you what was funny when that came down, and I was at the time, if we hadn't had to have sold then, or done the deal, because there was the influx of money was necessitated. I remember Case saying, if I'd waited 6 months, I could have made like 10 times as much on this sale. And it wasn't, if I waited 6 months, I wouldn't sell the company. So people who think that Nickelback would have saved the company, maybe Case would have done the same thing anyway. Who knows?
Yeah, good point. Yeah. What was it like in terms of the day-to-day afterwards? Can we know the sort of the feeling appears to be, and I want to put a nail in the coffin on this particular section of my intrigue, right? They wanted Nickelback and they wanted Slipknot, and they wanted to have involvement in the administration of those two acts and those two assets. The rest of it, Roadrunner, do your thing. You know exactly what you're doing. Was it like that?
I think they wanted Slipknot.
Yeah.
That's all they knew they had. Mm-hmm. Nobody thought Nickelback, even though I think Nickelback was starting to break at the time. Mm-hmm. When they started talking about the deal, it was just Slipknot was the biggest band on the label, and that's all that mattered. I don't think that IDJ had any idea that they were going to tell us how to do a Slipknot record, and how to market a record. I think that, I don't know that there was any grand connection, between Case and Leor. Right. But, the Biohazard deal was something to hang your hat on, which introduced one to the other. But it's not like, I don't think Case had industry contacts like that he was in touch with throughout the years. I think that it just became like, okay, we're going to need to do something. We got to find a partner. And then feelers were put out however they were put out. I don't know if they were from outside counsel. but then that's certainly one of the things that probably would have, Lior would have known what Roadrunner was, firsthand. And I think Case, he liked Lior a lot. I think that they got along really well. And that's really a big deal when it comes to who you're going to do deals with. Obviously the dollars have to count, but when Lior left, I'm to this day, I still don't understand why IDJ didn't buy the rest of Roadrunner when they had the chance, And I think that it was just L.A. Reid and Case didn't have the same vibe that he had with Lior, And I think it was as simple as that, And perhaps they didn't feel that there would be future successes, or they weren't guaranteed. I don't know. It was still surprising when that, that came about, that, wait a second, Case is going to be able to buy the company back now, And then it just made sense to go back to Lior. So, he came in again, a second time.
I think I think you touched on something which was one of my many theories. Obviously, the advantage of having like 70 hours of interviews is you can track me forming thoughts in my head, and then the moment when I kill them because they're wrong. And one of those is me thinking that the Biohazard deal was like the first domino that fell, and that caused everything else, because that's where I keep thinking that Lior then was aware of Roadrunner and the viability of it as a brand, in which I call it a love affair, because I keep thinking that that's what he understood Roadrunner to be, and therefore it informed the deals going forward. And maybe it's bollocks, probably is. But can you tell me a bit more about Lior as a person? Because his role in Roadrunner being bought out by these majors, or at least having an investment in these by these majors, it kind of, I feel like when he appears in my conversations, he's got this sort of like antagonistic tag, and I don't intend it to be so. So I'm trying to ask people who knew him what he was like, because he's obviously just probably a normal dude. Well,
I mean, look, I'm not going to have a lot to say because I didn't travel in the same orbit as Lior. Right. I mean, obviously, brilliant businessman. The track record bears that out. I think that he's it's one thing that you notice in the different coasts in the U.S. and Lior's a New York guy. And there's a certain grit that people have from New York, and rolling up their sleeves and doing some work. But yeah, I mean, I don't have much more to say. I mean, I do know that I was impressed. Lior. I think somebody had told me this. Who worked? He will know everybody's name in a room if he's having a meeting, and that's the highest level executive to the person who's lowest on the totem pole. And I think that's part of what also had an attraction to Case and Roadrunner working with him, because we definitely had a very family ethos at Roadrunner.
Yeah.
And, I remember being at a meeting. I had to go to a board meeting to get approval on a deal at Warner. And, Lior's like, hey, Ray, blah, blah. It was, it was
totally informal.
It gave you this confidence that you had him on your side, and he knew who you were, and he understood, and he was going to, look, it was an interesting time, but I don't know much more about him other than that, so I'd be like trying to, I'd be blowing smoke up your ass if I
it's cool.
told you I knew something.
It adds color to something I've not got any color on. And I think it's important because there are no antagonists in this story, I don't think. And I think it's important to highlight that.
Yeah, but I think when the deal happened, obviously anybody working at the company is going to wonder, what does this mean to our future? And I think that for a long time, it meant nothing except that we had backup, and we had different distribution, we had some help doing other things. But, we were still this metal label at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I remember one time I had a business affairs, a paralegal of sorts, who actually is working with me now again after all these years. Joan Bolvin used to sit next to me for a while at the 902 office, and we were trying to, Nickelback was going to be on some MTV special, right? Some big MTV appearance. And I thought we had everything under control, and the people uptown kept calling Joan asking what was going on, and it was like, we've got it, and then I remember saying, give me the phone. And it was Julie Greenwald was on the other end of the phone, and she's always, she's been, working with Leor for a long time. And
Mhm.
at that time I was still, the indie guy, metal guy. I didn't know who she was. I was just like, listen, we got this. It's all good. We've done the X, Y, and Z, and they're going to appear, and it's all going to be fine. And that was a moment where, she said, well, look, I just need this to happen, because if not, then Leor's going to come down on us, And I mean, it was just, he's going to hold people accountable,
Mhm.
and that's kind of, Case would do the same thing, I guess. But it was just funny that, okay, what that taught me, like, what, get shit done.
Mm.
Like, if you can do something today, just do it,
Mhm.
and there's nothing gained by letting a Nickelback appearance on MTV that's super important sit for a day or two,
Yeah.
like, push them to get it done quicker.
Mhm.
And but other than that, I think the radio people or marketing people would have much more to say about day-to-day interactions. As far as
Yeah.
BA went, Island Def Jam basically had nothing to do with our business affairs.
Mhm.
I would talk to one of the business affairs directors occasionally, and maybe if we had a big deal that I don't even know what the big deal would be at this point in time, I might have talked to him to let him know what was going on.
Yeah.
But they were really out of our lives, so it was just, we were doing our thing, and everybody was happy because it was working.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
How do I go from here? I've got an idea where I'm going to go from here, but I feel like there's like, because we're on the trajectory of like, oh wait, we'll talk about Warner, we'll talk about Atlantic, we'll talk about these bits, but I'm also like, this era of like the metal zeitgeist is like really important to me, because that's what I was raised in.
Right.
But I have no specific kind of like through line as to how we can interrogate the Triviums and the Kill Switches of the world, because I imagine for you it was kind of like business as usual.
Yeah, I remember I saw one of the discussions you had, and I remember because like the A&R guys always like to build consensus, because it always helps their cause.
Yeah.
And I do remember, and I had look, I don't think there's anybody at Roadrunner I didn't like, and I would spend a lot of time with the A&R guys just hanging out. So at one point, Gitter called me into his office, and he starts playing me different music. And I distinctly, I don't remember who it was, but I remember there was like a dubstep version of The Wizard from Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
That was incredible, And then that's the same place where he played me the Kill Switch record that was on Ferret. And I remember saying, well, why are you signing stuff like this, And, now I've learned he had that conversation with other people, and those other people probably meant more to him than Ray Garcia at BA. But yeah, I mean, stuff comes from, places you don't expect sometimes, But yeah, it was, Kill Switch was an exciting band to have. I remember Trivium, they actually played one of our Roadrunner conventions.
Right.
And, it was an interesting night. I'm going to leave it at that. Roadrunner was work hard and play hard.
Yeah.
And those conventions, not everybody drank, but those that did seem to do a really good job of it.
Have you got any Christmas party stories? That's not going to get you in trouble.
I don't think I have anything great to say. The parties were legendary. To this day, when somebody brings it up on a social media account, people crawl out of the woodwork talking about how great they were. And, it was interesting. When I started, it was the last time we had it at the basement of CBGB's.
Oh, wow.
And the singer of the band I mentioned earlier, Toilet Boys, was DJ Miss Guy, and she was DJing the event.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, you would have surprising people show up sometimes.
Mm.
Like I remember one of them, Peter Tork from the Monkees was there, and I have no idea why he was at our office party, but he was. I remember when we signed Jerry Cantrell, he was going to be at the Christmas party, and then a ton of bands wanted to be there because Alice in Chains was huge to a lot of those bands. Even Nickelback, I remember, was like, oh my God, Jerry Cantrell's going to be there. We got to go. So any number of people like that, but it was just, it was a great time. It was interesting because when we had the party in our office, this team catering company would come in and they would curtain off all of the cubicles.
Right.
So you basically just had this maze, and occasionally there would be a bar, and it was packed. And for the longest time, you could smoke, and I mean, the place would just be, music's blasting, everything. I do remember somebody, maybe Kathy Merritt, mentioning, and yes, I remember there was, two people fucking in Case's office when I went to get a jacket or something, but that seemed to happen all the time. Yeah, they were just good times.
Some things are just meant to remain sacred.
So wait a second. Let me bring this up, though. Where after Roadrunner United, we had the Roadrunner United concert.
Yes.
I don't know if you know about. Okay. Mm-hmm. That became our holiday party that year.
Right. And okay.
At one point, we were going to sell tickets. We were going to try. And, boy, time passes. I don't remember if we wound up selling any tickets to the event. But I do remember that we had basically I don't know if there was a different section of it, but it was a rather large venue in Times Square. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was an open bar. So it's like basically having a concert, with a few thousand people with an open bar. And I remember when Case was talking about it, saying like, Case, this is going to be like really expensive. And he said, Ray, 25th anniversary only happens once every 25 years. So... it was like, we're probably not going to be here the next time it rolls around. And it was like, we can afford to spend on this one. And I just thought, you're looking back at it, that was so insane. And I do remember I was with Monty, and he was talking to Josh Silver from Typo. Mm-hmm. And, the business affairs people always get a bad rap because people, they think that, we're the ones who are screwing them somehow.
Yeah.
And I remember the Case walking up, and then Monty introduces me, and Josh goes, "Oh, Ray Garcia, I hate you." And Case is like, "I like that." He liked to have some friction going on between parties from time to time too. So anyway, but
yeah,
it was it was the most insane show, and for me, I mean, seeing Killswitch with both singers on the same stage was incredible. Mm. It was just a great job. It was a great, little tribute to Monty. Yeah, definitely an amazing, amazing show.
Yeah, it's all available on YouTube, and everything regarding Roadrunner United, that warrants its own podcast series. Really, there's so many different nodes to connect, and the output of the concert as well, and various ensuing shit shows. It's worth an academic exploration, really. Before we move into the Warner years and like your Atlantic years, tell me about this trip that Marcus asked me to ask you about. South America.
I have nothing to say about that trip. I can tell you the reason for the trip was there was an individual down there who I think I'll let remain nameless.
Sure.
Who had purchased, I guess, Roadrunner Brazil. And this guy had built up, he had distribution offices in Colombia, Argentina, maybe Chile, Brazil, Mexico, I think in Spain as well. And basically, I mean, South America, you talk about the Wild Wild West. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were only the majors down there, and there was hardly any independent distribution, right? Mm-hmm. So this guy had built, it was like, okay, he's got a network, one-stop shopping. He's like the only game in town, unless you want to go to a major. Yeah. But he owed us a ton of money, and we went down there basically to find a way to sue him. And Marcus and I were trying to see if he was in the country. And it was like a little bit of like, James Bond sleuthing or something, private eye work. We're going into his office, trying to see if he's in the office, and calling up and trying to psych him out. And we never found him. There was a lawsuit. I'm not sure how it wound up though, but yeah, it was a fun trip though, for sure. And it was great because actually Ian Flint, who was the CFO of the company, comes into my office and he's like, "Oh, you should talk to Marcus. He's going to South America to deal with this situation. Yeah, you should just touch base with him." Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, well, who's he going to meet with? And then not only were they going for that reason, Wally, who is international, was going to present Roadrunner to the Warner labels, right? So it was dual purpose. So one of the people Wally was meeting with, who was the head of the Warner office in Chile, had been in my wedding party like 4 years earlier. And I'm like, well, how am I not going to be there? So I walk over to Case's office and he's like, "I forgot that you worked in South America," because I worked for a year for BMG Chile. Right.
Right. Okay.
So he's like, "You must go." So by the time I got back to my desk, there was already an email like, get Ray on the plane, blah, blah, blah. So I wound up going on this trip, and it was, it was like a case kind of trip. It was go to Sao Paulo one day, go to Rio one day, go to Buenos Aires one day, go here one day. And it was, just your head is spinning,
Yeah.
Oh, wait, let me tell you, I know that people have mentioned cases being in New York every 2 weeks.
Okay.
Which is obviously true.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember one instance where he went from Japan to LA to New York to London to the Netherlands within a week. And it's just, I mean, geez, I go on a 2-hour car ride and I've had it. So I don't know how he did it. I don't know how he did it.
That's mad. That's absolutely insane. Did you have any dealings with Japan?
Every once in a while there would be some kind of BA issue that went on. I mean, typically we'd have to get bonus tracks, I think. But it's funny, like I had actually worked for a while at a little indie distributor that kind of prepared me for Roadrunner, because there wound up being a Dutch office that was trying to set up these offices in various territories.
Mm-hmm.
So they had one in Spain, one in Germany, one in Italy, one in the Netherlands, one in the US. And I think that, that kind of helped me understand certain things. Like I was dealing with these people and obviously, even simple things like knowing what the Dutch holidays were, and when people would or wouldn't be in the office, or, things to talk about. But yeah, Japan, I didn't have that much, but I do remember on one of those Roadrunner conventions, it was my daughter was having her first communion, I think, on a Sunday. And these conventions went from Friday and you'd come home Sunday night. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I got to be home Sunday. Like I'll go earlier, but I got to find a way to get home. Mm-hmm. And they're like, we'll figure it out. And then I wound up sharing a car, and what was probably like a 4 or 5 hour car ride with Shushka, who's the head of the Japanese office, who spoke a little more English than I spoke Japanese, which is nothing. But it was killer because, we were both music fans, mm-hmm. and we were talking about, 80s metal bands like Loudness and these pop bands that the guitar player was in before. And, somehow we managed to kill those hours. But yeah, I don't have, there's not much else to tell, unfortunately.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Shushka won't appear on camera, unfortunately.
Interesting.
But I am in touch with him, which is pretty cool.
Okay, cool.
Okay, let's bring this train into the station with. By the way, I appreciate you watching enough previous conversations to sort of have an understanding of my own immature understanding, because it does help me sort of fill out the context of these things.
I'll have to send you an email with some corrections of.
Yeah, no, totally. I get them all the time. Which is fine. If something's so grievous, I'll make sure that it's noted somewhere so people can see it. But nature of the beast with this low stakes YouTube.
Sure.
So why does it take Warner 4 years? I'm speaking 2006 to 2010 before they start making any substantial changes.
Well, I think that what happened was, when 2010 came around, that's when we became fully owned.
Yes.
And that was prior to the Trigger event, which I believe would have been the year after. And what happened was, I think Case just didn't want to have to play by other people's rules anymore. Mm-hmm. He had, we operated fairly freely, but then there were things that came in, when you're doing certain deals, you had to get certain approvals. And I think if you spent more than $250,000 on a deal, you had to get Warner approval.
Right. Okay.
And I think that Case had it when there's an artist that had a pretty rich deal, always made us money, but Warner's in it for the big score, and if they're going to spend, let's say $1 million, to use a number, on an artist, mm-hmm. they want it to blow up. They want the next Bruno Mars. They don't want to have just this legacy act that mm-hmm. is doing, regular, constant business. Now, Roadrunner Case always wanted to find, like the next Slipknot, the next Typo, whatever. He was always looking to break something.
Yes.
But we always had other material that was kind of like, if you had a portfolio of stocks and these were the consistent ones like IBM, and then you took your chances with other stuff.
Mhm.
So, he had an artist that, they'd been around for over 10 years. Everybody knew that they were going to continue to do the business they're doing.
Mhm.
And he was getting a hard time about it. And I think that ultimately was where he just said, you know what? Okay, I'm done.
Really?
And then that's when I think that's what made him decide to sell. He just was like, this, I know you don't think I know how to do business, you know? So I think that's really what happened. And that's when then they took over and it became fully owned by Warner.
Mhm.
And then once you're fully owned, then you have no choice but to operate as a Warner company does, and we used to have an outside lawyer who would do some of the day-to-day back and forth on deals for us.
Mhm.
And Warner Base said, we don't have outside lawyers, so you
Right.
got to do it, Ray. If you need help, we can have somebody else here do it too,
Mhm.
and so that's when changes happened, obviously, and then soon after that, there were a lot less Roadrunner employees. We moved uptown. I was lucky enough to be able to be one of the ones that, moved uptown. And it was different then because I was still doing all the Roadrunner work, but I was also doing other work.
Right.
At that point, I wasn't a Roadrunner attorney anymore. Then I was Atlantic. I was senior VP of Atlantic, and it was great. I learned a lot there too because throughout my entire career, I'd never worked at a I don't want to say formal,
Mhm.
but I'd always worked at indie companies and basically had to figure everything out for myself, or as Kay said, hire somebody, learn, and then do
Yeah.
it yourself. So it was interesting to be in that setting, but it was different. I no longer was I, directly discussing deals with the guy who made all the calls.
I actually think you're the first person I've spoken to who worked in post Red Wedding Roadrunner. So this story tends to end with a lot of people saying, Roadrunner's still doing some great stuff, but it's not the same as it was. No hard feelings. This is how the world ends up sometimes, blah, 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 blah. Go listen to Code Orange because they're shit hot.
Right.
That's kind of how the story ends. What's your take on that, having lived both lives?
I think that you still had a dedicated crew, who was still carrying the Roadrunner flag. I think myself, but Dave Rath was on the front lines of that, wanting Roadrunner to still be what it was. Mark Abramson was still there for a while. Chris Brown, Susie Accuse, Mike Ligori, who's an A&R admin. Those people were still there. They still loved what Roadrunner meant. We still had the artists that mattered, that we brought with us. They finally they got Gojira to a certain level last time out and this time, which is incredible.
Yep.
So that's and that was one of my favorite signings, and love that band. And I'm so happy they've reached, the point that they did.
Mm-hmm.
But so that shows that there's, there was still some juice there, the Roadrunner could still do Roadrunner stuff. Obviously now it's just very different because there's less people there. And I guess, and they're trying to do different things to stay relevant.
Mm-hmm.
But, for those few years, we were still doing what we were doing. We had a #1 Slipknot record come out, which was tremendous. We had the Kill Switches, we had other artists that were still, that everybody still, not that people don't care now, obviously everybody still cares. And I think anytime you're at a record company, the people working there really do give as much of themselves as they can to the artists, and that's true whether it's Roadrunner or it's Atlantic or it's Epitaph or Century Media, whatever, those people, I always say the music business was built on young people who wanted to be next to the next to the bands and enjoyed getting the tickets and weren't necessarily always compensated great. But it's, a young person's game in a lot of ways. So anyway, I think that it was just difficult because some artists would start, options would not get exercised, we lost some bands that, people thought would have been with us forever.
Yeah.
Even like Devil Driver, like Des Fafara had been with Roadrunner for so long, and, it's a shame that it didn't continue then. So I think it was Roadrunner before that time was a certain thing. And then we were in a different ballpark.
Nice. Yeah,
We were doing something different, and it could never be what it was. And it doesn't mean that some of the stuff that happened there wasn't just as great. You know what I mean? And before I left was when they were just looking to sign Code Orange. Code Orange, and then fantastic band. You know, and then they've gotten some other younger bands that are also killer. So it was just it couldn't last forever.
No.
So it wound up just going the way it went. But it was funny. When I was being in business affairs, a lot of times people think more about what's going on in the background. And I remember when Mark Abramson was let go, that happened on a Friday. I had taken that day off. Now, Mark's a friend of mine. We actually were part of a group. We would go on road trips to see hockey games in other states and other countries.
Right.
There's a group of us, which included some other ex-Roadrunner people. And I get to work on Monday, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Abramson's not here anymore," And I'm like, I call him up, and he's like, "Oh, I thought you knew." And I'm like, I may be the lawyer, but I'm not that heartless. Like, you're my friend. What are you talking about? And so, interesting. You get voted radio promo guy of the year by the biggest periodical, and then you don't have a job anymore. So it's a weird business.
Yeah. Very strange. Yeah. Very strange. Right. So, and have I missed anything? Are there any stories that you had backed up in your hard drive there that I haven't I haven't skirted through or skirted past?
Well, yeah, it's
there's always the answer's always, of course there is, but nothing's coming to mind.
Yeah, but you know what? Being the lawyer at the company, my stories are a little different, and it's not the same as being like on a tour bus with a band or something.
Oh yeah, fuck that, dude. That's my background. I'm much more into that stuff.
Well, I got to tell you though, one of the funniest things that happened. Deicide was doing their last record for Roadrunner. It was probably their 8th. I think it was one of those deals that ran very long. So we get this artwork, and we get these printouts, and I get called into the art department, and like the inner fold out, of the jewel box, it's like Jesus Christ on a table, and there's, I can't remember, it's like the Virgin Mary's head, and a bunch of snakes are coming out of his crotch, and there was something as repulsive on the front cover, and people are like, "Can we put this out?" And like, will they even print this at the printing? And I'm like, "Hey, well, I got to do some research on this. Not sure, And for 2 days, the company, including the president of the company, like everybody is like, "What the fuck are we gonna do? Like, can we even put this out? This is crazy. I don't know. What do we do?" And then Glenn Benton, I think, calls up Monty. And Monty mentions it. He's like, "Oh, you guys thought that was the real artwork?" And he's just cracking up. And he just sent us this bogus artwork to fuck with us after all these years. So
that's good.
Good
on, Glenn.
Yeah, what else? What else would I have for you? No, I don't know if there's any. I'm trying to see if any of the notes I had. There's some things that are more that aren't funny stories, But there was one. I remember Slipknot, I think it was for Iowa. They wanted to have this special casing that would include live maggots in the spine of the CD box. Now, we were all wondering how they would stay alive in the CD box, but obviously that wasn't going to work. And then, they wanted this really crazy packaging that involved tin foil or something. And record contracts are written a certain way, and if product is prepared out of standards, there's extra cost. So at one point, I had to have a conversation with Clown. I think it was Clown to explain to him that for every CD they would sell, they would owe us a quarter because the packaging was so expensive.
Yeah,
and he didn't seem to care.
That could sound cheap, man.
No, but we wound up finding a middle ground that was really cool, and they didn't wind up paying an arm and a leg for everything. But that was another weird one there. One of my favorite stories, which was Case could be brutal at times, especially in the A&R meetings. And I think Gitter had a band, and I think he made the mistake of saying, "This is the craziest crowd I've ever seen for a band." And then Case, I wasn't there, so this is hearsay, but he just said, "Oh, really? I was at Black Flag in Berlin in 1983 when they tore the toilets out and threw them all on stage. Was it that crazy? And he was like, okay, it wasn't that crazy. But like Case was a music guy, you know, and he had those kind of experiences, and he would talk the talk, you know, and walk the walk, you know, and you know, I remember when we tried to sign the Dresden Dolls, who again were, you know, left turn kind of band for Roadrunner, right? And Case went to meet with the band, which is Amanda Palmer and the drummer, whose name I forget now. Unfortunately, he was an insanely good drummer. And I think Jonas Naxon as well, and probably the A&R guy, it was Dave Basin. They went to Boston or wherever they were. And like, I just remember them saying like, Case just killed it. Like he just knew everything to say, was on the same page with the artist. You know, they were unrolling, developing a marketing plan where there would be a video for every song. And it was just like, masterful, you know? And I think, you know, and Case wasn't bullshitting, you know? And it was, you know, and he closed a deal. You know, we wound up releasing the first record, I think under another label name, you know, because it was like, wow, Roadrunner would be a little weird releasing this. But yeah, just interesting. You know, he just interesting guy, and like I said, you know, very, you know, between Case, Ian Flint, who's an amazing finance person, you know, he would develop all these flow charts, you know, and I'd be like, okay, whatever. What's the bottom line? Okay, great. You know, I'm not a numbers guy. I'm a lawyer. You know, I deal with words. And then with Doug, you know, Doug Keogh, who, you know, you may or may not wind up talking to. I mean, he would obviously, I think he'd be one of the people that would have the full story because he was there for almost the entire ride. But I remember one time, Doug wasn't a lawyer, although I think his family was judges. But he told me, I said, well, look, the contract says this. And he's like, I don't care what the contract says. And he's like, we're going to do what's right. And there were many times where, you know, we didn't take all these deductions and reductions that you could for an artist because it's like, he just didn't think it was, you know, it was just ridiculous. You know, some of the stuff record companies put in contracts look good on paper, but it winds up coming up with a result that is so unfair, you know. And he was very, you know, whenever people came asking for money, they didn't always get a yes. And so I think some people obviously weren't that happy all the time. But I consider him like one of the most ethical people I've ever met, period. Not even in this business, you know, especially in our business, you know. And so being able to work with those guys and, you know, grow up with them was just incredible, you know, great learning experience. I got another story, if you want to hear it.
Oh yeah, keep going.
Grunt Truck. I remember Grunt Truck being discussed.
I forgot to ask you about this one.
Well, I didn't have anything to do with.
Of course, this was after your time. That's why I didn't add it in. That's fine. I didn't have
anything to do with the disputes that went on.
Yeah.
But I remember because I found out after the fact and we were dealing with it. So at some point, you know, they had a brilliant lawyer who used the strategy, and I mean that seriously, not sarcastically. But he had this strategy of having the band declare bankruptcy to get out of their deal, which like Natalie Cole did, you know, I mean, like major artists did this. It did not work out for this band. All right. I don't know what happened, but it took years. The band wound up disintegrating, I guess, over all this. But what I do remember is years later, we're in a management meeting and there's a letter and it's basically the bankruptcy court. And it seems that one of the, you know, one of the guys in the band, maybe it might be one of the only people, there might be one or two only left, but one of the people left in the band had come into some money because of an inheritance. And they were asking us to put in a claim, you know, for our share. And I remember Case saying like, I don't want to do that. He's like, this guy's been through enough, you know, like he's like, can't we just say no? And then I said, well, we can, but if you say no, that just means that, you know, the IRS or AT&T or whoever the hell else he owes money to is just going to take all the money. And so I think we probably put the claim in. I don't know if we ever received any money. If we did, I think we would have wanted to have just sent it to the guy, you know, because like I said, Case was he just thought it was wrong to be going that far. It's like, you know, it's water under the bridge at this point and bands never pay you back. That's not part of the deal. You know, it's a business and okay, you lose some, you win some. But I remember him feeling, you know, bad about that, you know? And then it was
Yeah.
like, okay, well, we got to figure out a way to handle this, you know?
I think the context around the dispute, if I remember rightly, there's like 3 different chapters of bankruptcy, one of which absolves you of all your debts.
Mm-hmm.
And Grunstruck
And terminates their contracts.
And terminates the contracts.
What we're going to do.
And I think they were in deep with Roadrunner, because obviously your label is a bank, it's not a record label. They're in deep to the flavor of about $1 million. And there's also a clause in a contract somewhere. I don't think it's law. I think it was just in the Roadrunner contract saying, you know, you can't be poached by another label while this debt is active, or something to that effect. And there was rumors that Polygram were going to snap up Grunstruck. And that's what triggered the lawsuit, which was, well, they can't declare bankruptcy knowing that there's an interest from a third party, because they're just dumping the debts, then going somewhere else to, you know, therefore be a viable product. And I think that's where it all comes from. Just an example of Roadrunner creating judicial precedent, which I'm impressed by as someone with that background.
Yeah, I think if somebody really was not happy at Roadrunner, and it got to be a problem, oftentimes Case wouldn't want them around anyway.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't happen that often. And obviously a lot of bands probably would have liked to have gotten off the label at certain points in time, you know, when somebody else came calling. But I mean, I remember, you know, Glassjaw being a band that, you know, phenomenal first record ahead of its time. And then I think the label was thinking that maybe they should have somebody else produce the next record instead of Ross Robinson, just to try something different. The band would have nothing, you know, he was like, you know, the fifth Beatle. It was like, no way, you know? And so then we wound up doing a deal to let them they went to Atlantic, actually, of all places, you know? Yeah. And there was a deal cut, you know, where there's a little royalty comes back to to Roadrunner. But that wasn't the first time. I mean, I think that, you know, part of the problem is when you're in early, you know, then somebody gets successful, then other people come calling. So, you know, I think that it might've been with Gitter's discussion, you guys touched on Ross Robinson's deal for I Am Recordings.
Yes, I try and unpack a little bit of how these imprints work.
I mean, I wasn't there when the deal was done.
No, sure.
But I think it was just, okay, Ross is, you know, we realize he's a special producer, you know, and we'd love to work with him, and labels are always looking for angles to bring in talent. Right. And it was like, okay, well, if Ross has his own deal, he brings bands to us, or he works with, you know, it's a calling card, obviously, the people will want to work with him, you know? So I think didn't he do the Burning Red by Machine Head?
I believe so.
You know, and then he had super success, obviously, with Korn and some other artists. And then I think one of the majors came after him. And it was like, you know what, at this point in time, it doesn't make sense for us to try and fight this, you know? And we worked out a deal with, I think it was Universal, you know, and there was like a deal cut, you know? So, you know, part of that is, you know, we were in first, you know, and helped get something going. And then, you know, then other people came calling, and it wasn't always the case. I mean, I saw Dino's discussion that one of the major labels was after them after they were signed to Roadrunner, which I didn't know, you know, I wasn't around for that either. But, you know, it doesn't surprise me that Case wasn't going to let a band go just because somebody else, you know, decided they wanted to sign them. Yeah. So, I got more. You have more time?
I've got all the time in the world, as long as I am conscious.
Okay, one last thing then, and it has to do with the business side of things, right? So there were these different things I would learn along the way that Case had done that I had no idea were happening, you know? And one of them was, you know, he had actually helped provide some seed money for one of the major magazines that came out during I guess it was the 2000s.
Okay.
And I was thinking like, oh, well, that was a great business move. So, you know, so he owns part of it. And I thought, no. He just gave them the money because he knew that in order for his business to thrive, he needs to have media to cover it. And like, what better way than having a major publication at that time, you know?
Yeah.
But there was that. And then there was also the Roadrunner website. I think it was while we were with IDJ. At some point, I find out that the Roadrunner website is the most visited music website in the world. Right. And I'm like, how, what do you mean? Like MTV isn't, or one of the majors? And it was true. And I had no idea how this happened. And then later on, I learned that, oh, well, we were housing the Blabbermouth site and we were hosting, I want to say Metal Injection, and I hope I don't get that wrong, but there were other sites we were hosting. And I'm under the impression that we were getting the credit for the traffic. So again, I don't know if this was Case's master plan, but hosting these other sites helped drive traffic, which just built the machine bigger.
Blabbermouth that's a massive part of metal history in general. I was hoping to at one point try and dissect that a bit, but I think the extent of the relationship between Blabbermouth and Roadrunner is Borovoy is Monty's friend, and there's been a relationship there for a long time, and it was just hosted. It was just on the infrastructure to help out, and as you say, perhaps drive traffic. But yeah, I think there's nothing more to dissect further than that, really.
Yeah, I remember at one point there was discussion to try and invest further. And then I think at that time we were with one of the majors, and they don't just do things for out of the kindness of their heart. They want to have the option to buy something a few years later, and that was never going to be part of the deal. And I was trying to pitch it to them that this was really more of a marketing exercise for us, that Blabbermouth would help the label, but they didn't buy it, and we didn't wind up doing any kind of deal, I guess, with Borovoy. So.
Fair enough.
All right. Well, I think I'm looking over my notes, and I don't think I have anything outstanding. So
no, that's cool. Let's close it out with the last question, which is describe your worst day at Roadrunner and then your best day at Roadrunner.
I'll tell you, the worst day was, I guess, what you call the Red Wedding. I refer to it as the Great Purge.
There's the Red Wedding.
I remember walking into my office, and it was funny because we had a 902 Broadway was a main room that was all open, kind of like an old newsroom, like you'd see on TV, right?
Yeah.
Low cubicles, everybody could talk to everybody. And then there were a few people in offices, and the A&R guys had their own little back cave where they were housed. So at one point, though, I got an office, and then they wound up bringing in an A&R guy who needed a space, so he took long story short, I'm in the back where Blue Grape used to be housed, right?
Okay.
And right by the kitchen area. So I'm in this room, and then I guess it was Warner, so the HR people used to take over the office next to us, right? And usually it was stuff like, okay, we're going to sign you up for your health insurance, whatever. So I come into the office, and I just walk in, and I see that it's I think it was Ron Berman was sitting in there with one of the HR guys, door closed. Go to my office, get my coffee, and all of a sudden I hear the walls were thin, as like paper thin.
Okay.
And I hear the magic word COBRA, which in America is an ongoing medical insurance plan that was instituted. It stands for something I can't.
Okay, all right.
And I'm like, COBRA. I'm like, oh, shit, like something's going down here. And then I get a call from the president of the label on my cell phone, because he didn't think I was in the office that day, but I came a little late, right? So anyway, so I pick up, I'm like, no, I'm in the office. He's like, oh, get Joan, who's my paralegal, and come to my office. And he goes, you're safe. And I'm like, okay. I go get Joan, we go to the office, and then I learn like, okay, a lot of shit's gonna go down today, Ray. And he wouldn't tell me who, but like, people are being let go, blah, blah, blah. And, now it's like, okay, your worst nightmare when you get bought by a major label. And I'm like, going back to my office, I pass by the window and Monty's in there. And I remember saying like, Monty too? Like, are you fucking kidding me? And so, yeah, that was like the worst day.
Wow.
Because it was just, you knew, what it wasn't going to be it anymore.
Yeah.
And then best day, I don't know. I mean, a holiday party, I don't know. Oh, I'll tell you a good one. We went to see Opeth. I think Ghost was warming up, and I wound up hanging out with Michael Ackerfeld, Monty, backstage for hours after the show. At one point, I think I wanted to leave, and it was like 2 a.m. And Michael was like, "You can't leave now." And we're playing metal trivia, which Monty is killing me at, unless it was a hair metal band. And I'm just drinking wine with Ackerfeld, and he's telling me and Monty we should go to his house for a barbecue, like the next time we're in Sweden. I'm like, okay, I'll take you up on that. So that was I think we were recording Ghost at the time. You didn't ask me if I'd seen a ghost. I feel
yeah, dude, do you know what fucking happened? Do you know what fucking happened? I heard a disembodied voice call my name in my kitchen. So I stopped asking. I'm not messing around. I'm not fucking kidding you at all. I'm not kidding you at all. That's what happened in my kitchen. I think it was like not long after. I might even been thinking about, it'd be good to get some answers to that question. And then that happened. I was like, maybe I should leave the Beyond alone. I'm happy to hear a ghost story if you got a ghost story.
No, the only one I have is the band Ghost. So we were after them big time. I think Dave Rath had pegged them to be like the band he had to have. And 2 records later, he would have been proven right. I mean, they were massive here and still are, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, we fell a little short. So anyway, that'll be it, I guess. I gotta tell you, my favorite Doug story has nothing to do with Roadrunner.
Cool.
So he was working for a world music label before Roadrunner, right?
Yes.
And so all of a sudden, I guess he's in the office, and his boss tells him that Ginger Baker from Cream is in the waiting room. And he has a flight at, LaGuardia Airport there in Manhattan. He's got a flight in an hour or something. He's like, and we need to sign him to a contract.
Okay.
And, this is like 1960 something, right? Or 70 something early. So there's no computers, what do you do? A contract from scratch. So Doug, being as industrious as he is, goes to the file cabinet, takes out a contract, whites out the name, writes in Ginger Baker, might have had to white it out a number or two, dollar figure, and that's the contract. So one of my favorite stories, like, who needs lawyers, right?
Yeah.
So at one point we signed the New York Dolls, right?
Yes.
That was late in the game. And basically that was, I think, the one time that it wasn't a business decision. I think Case described it as, there's that girl in high school you never got to date that you wanted to date. And he's like, I want to put out a New York Dolls record. So we did, and it was a little different. It was more, I thought it was a little more Stonesy than New York Dollsy, but a fun record. But the bass player, Sammy Yaffa, used to be in Hanoi Rocks. He actually worked at Roadrunner for a day. He was working with Nelson in the mailroom for one day, called in sick the next day, and then never showed up again. And I said, well, that's rock and roll. Like, Sammy Yaffa doesn't need to be working at a record company. He's a rock star, so.
That's awesome. Dude, this has been really good though.